Hello, and welcome to Quick Bites, where we talk about firefighter nutrition in 10 minutes or less. My name is Megan Lounce. I'm a dietitian that specializes in first responder nutrition. And today we are talking about one of the hottest topics for first responders, caffeine and energy drinks. Now, I would be the brightest first responder nutritionist if I said that you should cut out all caffeine, because A, you would set me on fire and not put me out, and B, because it's really not essential to cut out caffeine if you're a healthy individual. So typically we would cut back on it if you had something with your heart, so high blood pressure, if you have acid reflux, or if you were pregnant, we would cut back significantly on that caffeine. But, it is something that can help reduce fatigue. And the biggest thing that you need to understand is that if you're struggling with energy, caffeine does not give you physical energy in the form of calories, typically. Of course, if there's sugar in the product, that's a different story. But caffeine will reduce the feeling of fatigue by binding to adenosine receptors in place of adenosine, which builds up over the course of the day as you had longer and longer time awake and less time asleep, right? So it can help reduce those feelings of fatigue and help you stay awake, which is important for someone who works 24 to 48 hours straight, right? So in terms of how much, we are trying to keep it under 400 milligrams of caffeine per day. So that's roughly 30 to 40 ounces of coffee total in the day, which isn't unreasonable, right? Like, I don't think that's horrible. But where you guys end up going wrong is adding in the energy drinks and the pre-workouts. And unfortunately, these products have gotten higher and higher and higher in caffeine over the course of time. We now see Bang, Reign, Celsius Heat clocking in at 300 milligrams of caffeine or more. And now I'm at that sad point where I'm recommending Monsters or Red Bulls, the sugar-free versions, because that's half the caffeine of what those larger 300 milligram doses. So now, am I recommending these products? Am I recommending energy drinks or pre-workouts? No. But if you can choose something that's a little lower in caffeine, that's a bad decision, right? And the other thing that I do want to mention is that when we talk about caffeine and dehydration, it will cause a mild diuretic effect. So you will see more, you'll lose more fluid in that first hour after consuming caffeine. However, the total hydration, your total body hydration over the course of the day will remain the same. However, this is under 400 milligrams in a sitting. You start doing some of those energy drinks, those pre-workouts, we could see compounding effects if you do end up dehydrated or you started off dehydrated. But in general, if you're drinking like a cup of coffee, like a standard 12 to 16 ounce coffee at the fire station, usually the fluid that is in that coffee will replace what is lost in that next hour. So it balances itself out, especially in habitual coffee drinkers, which most first responders are drinking pretty habitually, specifically 25 ounces a day. It's considered equally hydrating to water. Now, am I telling you to just pound as much coffee at the station, basically put your face under the coffee machine? No, but because again, that caffeine can add up and lead to more side effects, lead to sleep issues. But, again, it's not necessarily going to cause dehydration in and of itself. Still use caution though with those energy drinks or those pre-workouts that are way, way, way over that, 200 milligram per serving recommendation. Now, the concern with energy drinks, like why are we so worried about the energy drinks? Well, they're technically considered a neurotoxin, specifically products with taurine, guanylactone, and glucuronolactone. You know what? I did my best. So with some of these products, they can lead to a higher risk for endocrine disorders, Parkinson's disease, and some of those other neurotoxic effects long-term when people drink them, once a day, every day for forever. Really, if you're going to do these, because the reality is you probably are, right? Like sometimes you just need something to survive the shift or get home, right? Drive yourself home if you've got a long commute. Really try to use these as needed, right? Like try not to make this a habitual thing where you drink energy drinks every single day. Try to limit the sugar as well. Sugar-free is usually perfectly fine so long as it doesn't give you headaches or GI issues. And then keep the caffeine under 200 milligrams per can or per sitting, right? So when we talk about worst better bad decisions, right? The worst offenders, again, are typically the bang, the rain, Celsius heat, C4. They're just clocking up there pretty high in energy. They're usually full sugar. So, not the best. Some better options are these to the right, where they're under, 200 milligrams, actually closer to 100. I prefer the Optimum Nutrition one just because, again, it's only 100 milligrams of caffeine. It's a little bit to wake you up, but it's not enough to just like start giving you a lot of side effects, so long as you're, a habitual drinker. Keeping in mind, if you start caffeine for the first time ever, there are different effects, right, relative to someone who's built a tolerance. So while these are not healthier, like these better energy drinks are not healthy by any means, they're a better bad decision when you're stuck and in a pinch. Now, if you do need to cut back on caffeine, cold turkey is not recommended. Why would you want to cut back on caffeine? Well, here's the thing. First responders, this is a hard job. You're sleep deprived, you're tired, you're cranky. Sometimes you just need something to keep you awake for the shift, right? But I've also seen my people on those overtime trains where they're doing a ton of overtime because they're trying to kind of push down some of the feelings that can come with a traumatic job, right? Or even have stuff going at home that they're trying to avoid. And they're drinking a ton of caffeine to get through that, a crazy amount of overtime. And that can lead to, I've seen over 2,000 milligrams of caffeine per day for some first responders. Usually it's still clocking in at, about 1,200. So if you're over 800 milligrams of caffeine a day when you're doing the math in your head, might be a time to cut back. If your sleep is garbage, also a time to cut back, or at least keep it earlier in the day. Caffeine does have a half-life, and usually you want to leave about 5 to 6 hours between your last caffeinated beverage and bedtime. So if bedtime is around 9 p.m. or lights out is 9 p.m., the last caffeinated beverage would be around 4 p.m. for most people. If you tell me like, hey, Megan, I can have a cup of coffee at the table and go right to bed after that. Here's the thing. It's not going to prevent you from falling asleep, but what it will do is mess with your sleep cycles. You'll spend less time in deep sleep, less time in rapid eye movement sleep, less time recovering, and therefore the next day you wake up feeling like garbage, reaching for more of caffeine, right? So caffeine can impact sleep. So if you're struggling with that sleep, stop caffeine at 2 p.m., 4 p.m., and try to make it through the night. Of course, if you're at a station that, you're running 4 calls after midnight, that kind of gets thrown out the window. But when you're off shift, consider cutting it. Now, if you have to cut out caffeine overall, cold turkey is not recommended. Why? We see mood disturbances, drowsiness, nausea, flu-like symptoms for 2 to 9 days. And again, those people who are like kind of trying to push down feelings with a stimulant, right? Caffeine, it can lead to some feelings popping up. So that's why I say work with a dietitian or a therapist. Specifically, the therapist is if any feelings start to bubble up because you're cutting back on caffeine, because your mood is lower, your energy is lower because you're not self-medicating, it might be something to consider working with a therapist. Now, of course, some people just need to cut back because they need to cut, they're overdoing it and they know they're overdoing it. You can swap for a lower calf or a half calf beverage. So half calf coffee at, or decaf coffee. I know it's sacrilege in the fire service, but here we are. You can switch again to a lower caffeinated energy drink, a lower caffeinated or non-stim, no stimulant or no caffeine pre-workout. They exist. You can cut back after lunch, or you can consider when the best time it is to cut back on caffeine. For some people, cutting back on caffeine is best off shift. They don't have a lot going on. They can rest the next day, that kind of thing. But if you're going straight into daddy or mommy daycare after a 24 or 48 hour shift, it might be easier to cut back on shift. So you kind of have to determine what works best for you. All right. So with summarizing caffeine, we're trying to keep it under 400 milligrams a day, or 30 to 40 ounces of coffee total. Energy drinks are not recommended, but we also understand that sometimes that's the nature of the job, right? Use them as needed. Keep it under 200 milligrams if you do choose to drink them. And if you are going to cut back on caffeine, cut back gradually and consider working with a dietitian or therapist at that time. Again, my name is Megan. If you have any questions, shoot me an email at megan@rescuerd.com or follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at rescuerd, rescue.rd.